Emma Woodhouse was a beautiful, smart, and rich girl. She had a nice home and a happy life. She lived for almost 21 years without much trouble or worry. Emma was the youngest of two sisters. Her dad was loving and kind. When her sister got married, Emma became the lady of the house. Her mom had passed away when she was very young. A good woman took her mom's place as a governess. This woman was like a mother to Emma. Miss Taylor, the governess, spent 16 years with Emma's family. They were more like friends than anything else. Miss Taylor used to be a governess, but she was so kind that she hardly made any rules. Now they lived together as good friends. Emma respected Miss Taylor's opinions but usually did what she wanted. The only problems in Emma's life were that she liked having things her way too much and sometimes thought highly of herself. These were the only things bothering her, but she didn't realize they were problems. Then something sad happened. Miss Taylor got married. This made Emma really sad. On Miss Taylor's wedding day, Emma sat and thought about it for a long time. After the wedding, when everyone had left, Emma and her dad had dinner alone. Her dad fell asleep after eating, and Emma was left alone to think about what she had lost. Miss Taylor's wedding seemed like a happy event. Mr. Weston, the man she married, was a good person with money and good manners. Emma had always supported their relationship. But for Emma it was a sad day because she would miss Miss Taylor a lot. She remembered how Miss Taylor had been kind and loving for 16 years. Miss Taylor had taught her, played with her, and taken care of her when she was sick. Emma owed her a lot. They had been such good friends for the last 7 years, especially after Emma's sister got married. They were like sisters, sharing everything and caring for each other. Emma felt lucky to have had a friend like Miss Taylor, who was smart, helpful, and interested in her and her family. Emma could tell her everything, and Miss Taylor never found fault with her. How would Emma handle this big change? Although her friend was moving just half a mile away, Emma knew there would be a big difference between having Mrs. Weston half a mile away and having Miss Taylor in the house. Even with all the good things in her life, Emma was now at risk of feeling lonely. She loved her dad, but he wasn't the best companion for her. He couldn't engage in a thoughtful or playful conversation. The age difference between Emma and her dad made things more challenging. Her dad hadn't married early, and because he had been a bit of a worrier all his life, not very active in mind or body, he acted much older than his age. While everyone loved him for his friendly heart and nice personality, his abilities wouldn't impress anyone. Emma's sister, who had recently gotten married and moved to London, was only 16 miles away. But that distance felt far, and Emma had to endure many long evenings at Hartfield before Christmas brought a visit from her sister, Isabella, and her family. Highbury, a big village almost like a town, was where Hartfield truly belonged, despite its lawn and shrubberies. The Woodhouses were very important there, and everyone looked up to them. Even though Emma knew many people in the village because her dad was friendly with everyone, none of them could replace Miss Taylor, even for half a day. It was a sad change, and Emma couldn't help but wish for impossible things until her dad woke up and needed her to be cheerful. Her dad needed support for his spirits. He was a nervous man who easily felt down. He liked everyone he was used to and hated saying goodbye to them. He disliked any kind of change, especially marriage, because it brought changes. He still hadn't fully accepted that his own daughter got married. He could only talk about her with sympathy. Even though Emma's marriage was a match of affection, he was now sad to part with Miss Taylor too. Due to his habits of being a bit selfish and not understanding that others might feel differently, he thought Miss Taylor had made a sad choice for herself. He believed she would have been much happier if she had stayed with them at Hartfield for the rest of her life. Emma tried to keep him from such thoughts by smiling and chatting as cheerfully as possible, but during tea he couldn't help but say the same things he said at dinner. Poor Miss Taylor. I wish she were here again. What a pity it is that Mr. Weston ever thought of her. I can't agree with you, Dad. You know I can't. Mr. Weston is such a friendly, nice, excellent man that he truly deserves a good wife. And you wouldn't have wanted Miss Taylor to live with us forever and put up with all my strange moods when she could have a house of her own, right? A house of her own. But what's the advantage of having her own house? Ours is 3 times as large. And you, my dear, never have any strange moods. We'll be visiting them often, and they'll come to see us too. We must start. We should go and pay a visit to them very soon. Dear, how am I supposed to get there? Randalls is so far. I couldn't walk such a long way. No, Dad, no one thought you'd walk. We must use the carriage, of course. The carriage? But James won't like to prepare the horses for such a short distance. And where will the poor horses be while we're visiting? They'll be in Mr. Weston's stable, Dad. You know we've already figured all that out. We discussed it with Mr. Weston last night. And about James, you can be sure he'll enjoy going to Randalls because his daughter works there as a housemaid. I just doubt if he'll ever take us anywhere else. That's your doing, Dad. You helped Hannah get that good job. No one thought of Hannah until you mentioned her. James is so thankful to you. I'm very glad I thought of her. It was fortunate, as I wouldn't have had poor James feel overlooked for any reason. I'm sure she'll make an excellent servant. She's a polite, nicely spoken girl. Whenever I see her, she always curtsies and asks how I'm doing in a very pretty way. And when you've had her here for needlework, I notice she always turns the lock of the door the right way and never slams it. I'm sure she'll be an excellent servant, and it will be a great comfort to poor Miss Taylor to have someone around that she's used to seeing. Whenever James goes over to see his daughter, you know, she'll hear about us. He'll be able to tell her how we all are. Emma tried her best to keep these happier thoughts going and hoped, with the help of backgammon, to get her dad through the evening without too much regret. The backgammon table was set up, but a visitor came in right after, making it unnecessary. Mr. Knightley, a sensible man around 7 or 8 and 30, was not only a very old and close friend of the family, but also connected to it as the elder brother of Isabella's husband. He lived about a mile from Highbury, visited frequently, and was always welcome. At this time, he was even more welcome than usual, having come directly from their mutual connections in London. He had returned for a late dinner after some days away and now walked up to Hartfield to share that all was well in Brunswick Square. This was a happy news, and it cheered up Mr. Woodhouse for some time. Mr. Knightley had a cheerful manner that always lifted his spirits. His many questions about poor Isabella and her children were answered very satisfactorily. After this, Mr. Woodhouse gratefully said, "It's very kind of you, Mr. Knightley, to come out at this late hour to visit us. I'm afraid you must have had a difficult walk." "Not at all, sir. It's a beautiful moonlit night, and so mild that I had to step back from your big fire. But you must have found it very damp and dirty. I hope you won't catch a cold." "Dirty, sir? Look at my shoes. Not a speck on them." "Well, that's quite surprising considering we've had a lot of rain here. It rained really hard for half an hour while we were at breakfast. I wanted them to postpone the wedding. Oh, by the way, I haven't congratulated you. Knowing the kind of joy you both must be feeling, I haven't been quick with my congratulations. But I hope everything went reasonably well. How did everyone behave? Who cried the most? Ah, poor Miss Taylor. It's a sad situation. Poor Mr. and Miss Woodhouse, if you please. But I can't possibly say poor Miss Taylor. I have a great regard for you and Emma, but when it comes to the question of dependence or independence, anyway, it must be better to have only one to please than two. Especially when one of those two is such a fanciful, troublesome creature, said Emma playfully. That's what you have in your head, I know, and what you would certainly say if my father weren't here. I believe it's very true, my dear, indeed, said Mr. Woodhouse with a sigh. I'm afraid I'm sometimes very fanciful and troublesome. My dearest papa, you don't think I could mean you or suppose Mr. Knightley means you? What a horrible idea. Oh no, I meant only myself. Mr. Knightley loves to find fault with me, you know, and a joke, it's all a joke. We always say what we like to one another. Mr. Knightley, indeed, was one of the few people who could see faults in Emma Woodhouse, and the only one who ever told her about them. Though this wasn't particularly pleasant for Emma, she knew it would be much less so for her father. She didn't want him to suspect for a moment that she wasn't considered perfect by everybody. Emma knows I never flatter her, said Mr. Knightley. But I meant no reflection on anybody. Miss Taylor has been used to have two persons to please. She will now have only one. The chances are that she must be a gainer. Well, said Emma, willing to let it pass, you want to hear about the wedding, and I'll be happy to tell you, for we all behaved wonderfully. Everybody was on time. Everybody looked their best. Not a tear, and hardly a sad face to be seen. Oh no, we all felt that we were going to be only half a mile apart, and were sure of meeting every day. Dear Emma bears everything so well, said her father. But, Mr. Knightley, she is really very sorry to lose poor Miss Taylor, and I am sure she will miss her more than she thinks for. Emma turned away her head, divided between tears and smiles. It's impossible that Emma should not miss such a companion, said Mr. Knightley. We shouldn't like her so well as we do, sir, if we could suppose it, but she knows how much the marriage is to Miss Taylor's advantage. She knows how very acceptable it must be, at Miss Taylor's time of life, to be settled in a home of her own, and how important to her to be secure of a comfortable provision, and therefore cannot allow herself to feel so much pain as pleasure. Every friend of Miss Taylor must be glad to have her so happily married. And you have forgotten one matter of joy to me, said Emma, and a very considerable one, that I made the match myself. I made the match, you know, 4 years ago, and to have it take place and be proved in the right, when so many people said Mr. Weston would never marry again, may comfort me for anything. Mr. Knightley shook his head at her. Her father fondly replied, Ah, my dear, I wish you would not make matches and foretell things, for whatever you say always comes to pass. Please do not make any more matches. I promise you to make none for myself, Papa, but I must, indeed, for other people. It is the greatest amusement in the world. And after such success, you know, everybody said that Mr. Weston would never marry again. Oh dear, no. Mr. Weston, who had been a widower so long, and who seemed so perfectly comfortable without a wife, so constantly occupied either in his business in town or among his friends here, always acceptable wherever he went, always cheerful. Mr. Weston need not spend a single evening in the year alone if he did not like it. Oh no, Mr. Weston certainly would never marry again. Some people even talked of a promise to his wife on her deathbed. and others of the son and the uncle not letting him. All manner of solemn nonsense was talked on the subject, but I believed none of it. Ever since the day, about 4 years ago, that Miss Taylor and I met with him in Broadway Lane, when, because it began to drizzle, he darted away with so much gallantry and borrowed 2 umbrellas for us from Farmer Mitchell's, I made up my mind on the subject. I planned the match from that hour, and when such success has blessed me in this instance, dear Papa, you cannot think that I shall leave off matchmaking. I do not understand what you mean by success, said Mr. Knightley. Success supposes endeavor. Your time has been properly and delicately spent, if you have been endeavoring for the last 4 years to bring about this marriage. A worthy employment for a young lady's mind. But if, which I rather imagine, you're making the match, as you call it, means only you're planning it, you're saying to yourself one idle day, I think it would be a very good thing for Miss Taylor if Mr. Weston were to marry her, and saying it again to yourself every now and then afterward, why do you talk of success? Where is your merit? What are you proud of? You made a lucky guess, and that is all that can be said. And have you never known the pleasure and triumph of a lucky guess? I pity you, Dot. I thought you cleverer, for, depend upon it, a lucky guess is never merely luck. There is always some talent in it. And as to my poor word success, which you quarrel with, I do not know that I am so entirely without any claim to it. You have drawn 2 pretty pictures, but I think there may be a third, a something between the do-nothing and the do-all. If I had not promoted Mr. Weston's visits here, and given many little encouragements, and smoothed many little matters, it might not have come to anything after all. I think you must know Hartfield enough to comprehend that. A straightforward, open-hearted man like Weston and a rational, unaffected woman like Miss Taylor may be safely left to manage their own concerns. You are more likely to have done harm to yourself than good to them by interference. Emma never thinks of herself if she can do good to others, rejoined Mr. Woodhouse, understanding but in part. But, my dear, please do not make any more matches. They are silly things and break up one's family circle grievously. Only one more, Papa, only for Mr. Elton. Per Mr. Elton. You like Mr. Elton, Papa, I must look about for a wife for him. There is nobody in Highbury who deserves him, and he has been here a whole year, and has fitted up his house so comfortably, that it would be a shame to have him single any longer, and I thought when he was joining their hands today, he looked so very much as if he would like to have the same kind office done for him. I think very well of Mr. Elton, and this is the only way I have of doing him a service. Mr. Elton is a very pretty young man, to be sure, and a very good young man, and I have a great regard for him. But if you want to show him any attention, my dear, ask him to come and dine with us some day. That will be a much better thing. I dare say Mr. Knightley will be so kind as to meet him. With a great deal of pleasure, sir, at any time, said Mr. Knightley, laughing, and I agree with you entirely that it will be a much better thing. Invite him to dinner, Emma, and help him to the best of the fish and the chicken, but leave him to choose his own wife. Depend upon it, a man of 6 or 27 can take care of himself.